So we know from a student's perspective that reading can be a very frustrating and an isolated activity. From the instructor's perspective, we want to know how do we know they're reading the material and do they understand the material? So I came across this study and it talked about the use of annotation. And the study said that students that annotate in the text are more likely to reread their annotations and are more likely to read more often. So I began to think about, well, how am I going to, that's a fascinating strategy. And I'd really like to figure out how I can use that in my class. So I'm going to try to figure out what kind of annotation process I'm going to use. And I came across a piece of software called Hypothes.is. I'm sure you probably know about it. I think there's others out there called Perusal. I believe Sarah uses that in her classes. But this is an open source free piece of software. So all the materials in my class are free. And I kind of struggle with two concepts here to deal with that are interrelated in that I wanted to shift the focus of learning onto the students rather than with me. And I wanted them to annotate what they saw was important in the readings that I assigned, rather than me, having instructor highlighted passages. Now, in order to do that, it involved a shift in another way of how we deliver our courses, and that was assessment. And I wanted to take the stress of grades and assessment away from students and provide them with targeted feedback. And so I had earlier in the previous semester, I had written all of them about this is the format that we're going to use. We're going to be annotating text. I'm going to provide feedback, and we're not going to have particularly grades assigned along the way. The idea was for me to get an opportunity to talk with the students rather than at the students. So I had to make a couple other considerations. I had to reduce the assignment load because I wanted them focused more heavily on a smaller assignment. And I kept reminding them, we're all in this together. We're all learning this together. But in order to get student buy-in, I was able to find a copy of this is what you need to do to get a grade C. This is what you need to do to grade B. And this is what you need to do to get a grade A. Because there are still people are focused on the assessment. And I asked them to comment on that. I said, if you find something in there that you don't like, then you let me know and we'll talk about it. And if it's so egregious, we'll take it out. And I said, basically, if I'll give all of you a B in this class, if you just forget about the grade and just focus on your learning, just focus on your learning. And they agreed to do that. I had no problem with that whatsoever. I gave them an opportunity to practice hypothesis. You can see that here. There's annotation up on the top, and then there's another portion that's called page notes, which opens up a completely different section that you can look at. So I got students to buy in on this. And what I chose to do next is let me show you. This would be a typical example of what I would do in the week. And that this would just have be Gorbachev here. I assigned students individual roles that they had to take on in reading their particular passage. And I gave them some prompts that they were to consider when they were doing their readings. I had, I think, roughly 25 to 30 students in there. So I found 5 different pieces of academic research based on the ideas that I wanted to get across. 4 of them were responsible for annotating. 1 was responsible for summarizing all the annotations that the others had made. And a 3rd student was responsible for finding 2 other pieces of research relevant to this particular topic. And so just to show you what that looks like and everybody has an assigned date when it's due. So they knew when it was due. This was a pattern I followed consistently all throughout the semester. Now, in conjunction with this, that was one of their assignments, to read the article, annotate it. They had a couple extra days. There were more assignments that I had in the course. But all of this was focused on thinking about the material, asking questions. And so what I wanted them to do is, in the second assignment, is I wanted them to create 2 questions based on the reading that they had just annotated that were not ones were designed to prolong the discussion. In other words, questions that you couldn't answer yes or no, true or false, a short answer, something like that. So I did that. And for about the first 3 or 4 weeks, I spent correcting I said, that question can be answered yes or no. You need to rephrase that. That question is a choice. It's this or that. And I gave them that feedback. So that went on for a while. And then I also had down here at the bottom, just for grins, I had a piece of period music that they could listen to if they wanted to do that, just to throw them off. Let's see, how do I get, okay. Okay, so we go through there. So they have that set, and I've got more slides here than what I can cover today, obviously. And if you take a look at them, you'll be able to see some of the annotations I wrote, how I responded, etc. With regards to the annotations, I also told them that if you can find a picture that describes that would help you remember this particular piece, and you discuss why you remember that piece, that would count as an annotation. And I also said that if you found a link to another resource that would explain it in greater detail, that would be an acceptable piece. So we did that all throughout the semester. And then in this particular week, hopefully, I decided to introduce a new role. It was called Devil's Advocate. And I took out the researcher role and I put in one called Devil's Advocate. And that got everybody excited about that. Everybody wanted to do that. I let that go for 6 weeks because I wanted to cycle everybody through each of the 6 roles that we had there. And I've come up with some changes that I'm going to make the next time I offer that. But they offered a Devil's Advocate. And then also in creating these questions for me, they would just create 2 questions and write them down. And I would write, yes, no. I help them with their questions. But then one student put up there a passage from the article and said, these are what the 2 questions I'm creating are based on. And I thought, wow, that's really great. Why didn't I think of that? And so I changed it up midstream. I said, guys, we're making a change midstream. I'd like you now to cite a passage that drew your attention or caused you to create those 2 questions. And they were receptive to that too. So that worked out very, very well for us in that class. Next thing, this is the Russian political system. I like to play with their minds a little bit. So we've been reading all these Western scholars. There's an article or a journal called Russia and Global Affairs. And it's all primarily written by Russian scholars, and they have their own perspective. And so I assigned them articles to read in that. And oh boy, did we have contact and feedback in that particular activity. And a second assignment that I had with this was, let's say we're focusing on the years 2012 through 2014. I had a couple of journal articles that were written at that time. And I say, you pick one of your choice and I want you to read that one. And I want you to tell me about how the author presents his perspective and the rationale. And now that you've heard the other side of the story, has it changed your thinking at all about, these particular issues that we're talking about? And they enjoyed that. And these are just examples of what we used. Some of the graphics that they came up with. All these are in the materials you have access to. and in the pictures that they found or created. Now, I worked with one of ELIS's people, Chad Bousley, we bounced a lot of ideas across. And when we first started using Hypothesis, he said, you probably ought to provide a video so the students would know how to use it. And I said, well, the website has a video on how to use it. I mean, why duplicate effort? But for some reason, students just, they want to see the instructor get frustrated, or they want to see the instructor go through the material and see it. So, okay, fine. Next time I'll do the video. It's not a problem. All of the annotations I would say the majority of the annotations that the students created for me, I responded to. So that got to be rather work intensive, and I think I can shift that around a little bit, maybe respond to the annotators every other week rather than every week. But the summarizers or the researchers or the devil's advocates, I think those are roles that I would kind of keep the same. I'm going to go back to one in a minute, but I've decided to change. I can track you. I decided to change a little bit how to run the roles. In the first couple of weeks, I'm going to do the annotator, the summarizer, and the researcher. And then the 4th through 7 weeks, I'm going to do like the annotator, summarizer, and a reporter. And that reporter is also going to look at the summaries from the other groups that are written and bring back to them, because all the articles are related to the topic that we're talking about. And then the last 6 weeks, by that time, they will have been acclimated to the course. Everything will have been, consistent for them. Then I'll throw in the devil's advocate, because I think they will be a little bit more versed to make some legitimate comments here. Now, I met with all of my students. Well, I opened the invitation to meet with all of them at least 3 times throughout the semester. Now, everybody knows that you can say no grades, but at the end, somebody's got to get a grade. And so they did get a grade. And this was one that we negotiated. And I had the criteria right up there, and I let them know far enough ahead of time what it was we were going to talk about. I had about 10 questions that I wanted them to address, and I can provide a copy of those if that's of interest to you. And one of the questions I asked, and I'm not trying to do this to pat myself on the back, but I asked them, and depending on how you phrase these questions, you can draw the response you want. If you want a very positive role, you get the very positive one last, so that's the last thing they remember and all that. So I did the exact opposite. So I said, what do you think? Did this course exceed your expectations, meet your expectations, or not meet your expectations? I had nobody in the last category. I had 21 students that finished the course. And I had 12 solid and 2 that wavered a little bit between the exceeded and the meet. And then the other 6 or 8 all said met the expectations. So I was happy with this particular round. I've been playing with this for a number of years and refining it as I go along. I have places throughout my course constantly where students can provide feedback. And I asked them in our last interview, how did the impact of not getting a grade affect you? And there were a couple that said, well, it would always be nice to be able to compare with, have some kind of a number. And I said, but yeah, I don't know about that. I'm wishy-washy on that so far. I thought that the idea was to release them to say what it is they want, to try to create an environment that was free. Because this class, the annotations in this on Hypothesis are just for this class. They aren't public. There were a couple that went public the first time, but they had to learn. I said, no, you posted public. That means anybody can see what you're writing. I've got a special link for this class, and you can put it in there. So that way it keeps it all private. It's all among us. If you look through, there was camaraderie all throughout the class. But there are a lot of moving parts in here because I also had an annotated bibliography project. A lot of times people like sign these nice big papers at the end of the semester for professors to read. And I thought, I think I want to help them focus more on finding resources to write those papers rather than write the papers. I've had many classes where they've written papers and I've read them, but and I asked them to broaden their horizons as far as their annotations go. Not only did I want scholarly articles, I said, if you find a scholar that writes on that publishes an article you like, see if they've got something on social media, because a lot of times they put white papers out there, they're bouncing ideas off other people. Use that as a source. Conference reports, websites, podcasts, anything. And we use podcasts throughout the course. I have about, I don't know, there's the stages of the annotated bibliography project. They had to provide 15 annotated resources, 5 in about the first month, 5 in the next month, and then 5 at the end. And at the very end, they had to tell me in an audio what they thought was the most helpful of the sources that they found. And I have a bunch of other different articles that I used. I use Padlet and other articles that I found, and I even had them do captions on political cartoons. I gave them a blank cartoon and I said, put a caption on that. And I was I was happy with the course. I think that it's a work in progress. I told them when I found a student made adjustments to the course that I thought were beneficial, I made sure to point it out. And I feel that many of them had ownership of the course. I think that with this annotating, you change reading from a passive process to an active process. Students have more understanding of work on communication, and the learning interaction increases. And that's what I chose to do in this particular course. So I'm going to go back these many slides and say that.